So with that, I would like to invite my further panelists onto the stage, and I would like to call another shareholder, obviously, I didn't know that. Intel, Marek Neumann, please, would you join me on stage? Marek is the Senior Director of Business Development for the Automated Driving Group of Intel. So in particular, he is responsible in that for this non-exclusive platform of autonomous driving. Thanks very much that you're joining us. Please have a seat. And then I would like to call in Dr. Gabriele Seibert. He has a very strong background in IT services and information technology. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks.
He is Managing Director at Accenture Digital and an expert in digital transformation, in particular of the automotive industry. And then last but not least, I would like to call in Alex Mackenzie-Torres. He is the VP of Innovation and Business Development for Toyota AI Ventures. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks very much for being here. All the panelists, you see we've very different views, you know, looking at continents, looking at the layers of the industry. We have expanded our, room of thinking already into the third dimension. And if I may start, Alex, with you, Toyota has shown a pretty impressive blueprint of an architecture of the future of autonomous driving. How are you looking at those ecosystems, regulatory questions, and in particular, looking at Volocopter technology is one aspect, but regulatory affairs, I guess, is the second one.
Well, thank you for the question. Also, thank you for having me over, and thank you for having all these great people around. It's complicated. So when it comes to regulatory terms, it's just not only about having the technology ready, but also to be able to work with the different levels of administration. Like we were discussing beforehand, like in the case of the US, you also need to be very careful because we have different legislations from a federal level and state level. In the case of Europe, as we all know, there's no unanimity, uniformity in terms of regulation when it comes to AD driving. But the key thing over here is how do you work with local authorities so that you can market your products, and also, in the case of Toyota, that we save lives. Because at the end of the day, the regulatory aspect is because you want to launch the best products in the market and you want to launch the safest cars in the market.
Mm. Gabriele, if I may ask you, in particular, the question of safety. It's like moral dilemmas is a lot of the issues that is discussed, how we handle, someone being driven over by a computer, if I just simplify that. How's your view on that if we think about AI and the future of mobility services?
Maybe in the first place we need to say that there's a lot of advancement in the technology. It's really great what AI can do in the car, and it is basically also the basis for really driving autonomously, which has tremendous success and tremendous advantages if it happens. But also we need to see that there are some pushbacks, so the technology is not as versatile as we hoped. There's a lot of, also from these kind of accidents that we've seen in the press, there's this conclusion that the technology behind it, which is basically deep neural networks, that it needs to be trained, and that it's kind of an open-ended learning process, which leads to these failures. It's like this kind of black swan theory. It sometimes happens something which you cannot predict, and that might be fatal. And this happened, and it also made the public more aware of that problem, because there was a lot of hype, and everyone, all the car manufacturers, they said we will be ready with that technology into 2020 or 2025 or something like that. And I was quoted once, and I think this still holds true for me, that we will have autonomous driving cars in broader mass transportation in the same time when we see a man landing on the Mars. And I think this is the similar this time horizon, and it's 2030 or 2040. It's not that far away, but it is some time to go. And especially we need to solve that problem in these neural networks, that they do not have any theory. They're just experimenting, they're learning, and then easy tasks like a 2 or 3 year old child could do, They just simply cannot solve. And this is why there's some kind of, the need is for a mixture of this self-learning technology with some theory-driven technologies, with also there in the realm of AI. It's all there. It's, for example, you have this knowledge representation systems and so on, and we need to combine this in some way in order to preserve as much of the advantages as we can, but without having all the downsides.
Okay, I see. So, I mean, taking the regulatory side is one. You've tapped into that also in your video already. Infrastructure, Marek, is another question. So we've seen fascinating pieces of technology. One may think about the trans-repeat, you know, this German train that never actually took off, even in a country like China that had no infrastructure at the point. So how do you look at, you know, the future of mobility services, autonomous driving, and a question of how that integrates into existing infrastructure? What types of compatibility issues can you see here?
Yeah, I think there's a very broad requirement actually to have interaction with the society in order to support this process and the rulemaking and the bills that are going to be issued, because a lot of the technology that we are very excited about is technology that will face regulation for a need. So what are the acceptable society norms for that? And I would actually add on the requirements of safety that are connected into this. So that's the reason why we decided to start an initiative acronymed with RSS, Responsibility Sensitive Safety, where there are differences between training AI over and over and over again, which there are very cool applications for doing this, but there's a need for a very strong network of rules that you actually can trust on. And that's the reason why we published the papers. They're freely available. We even published pseudocode inviting for broad adoption of that approach, which is very straightforward thinking by setting norms that are characterized acceptable for the transportation and mobility environment, but within these norms also enabling an environment where you're not creating an incident on your own blame, which by the interaction of human beings, the interaction of machines, the interaction of backend networks, communication issues that might come up, disappear, appear, a lot of influences that are non-continuous interacting with the mobility and the traffic as it happens online have to be covered locally, and that provides a provision where we are driving a significant investment, a community investment which is open to every partner that is interested to link into it, to make sure that we are solving the issue about the real human interaction together with the all-exciting technology that comes with AI and with highly and fully automated environments in public transport.
Okay. Marek, thanks very much. And a lot of what the approach that you just laid out, you know, like publishing pseudocode, inviting people to link in, that the logic behind is very much, sounds to me like more a platform logic, very, very common to, you know, the software and IT industry. You know, just from my side, looking at from the outside to the automotive industry, I think like a platform, like for a single company, so non-proprietary platform thinking, and in particular software platform thinking, does not seem to be the natural approach of the incumbents in the automotive industry. Gabriele, if I, you know, may ask that, looking at your activities in, you know, Lab 1886, creating those mobility solutions in the Daimler context, how do you perceive necessary changes to corporate culture, and in particular approaching innovation in terms of the necessity of such kind of platform thinking as Marek just pointed out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as Lab 1886, we have the task to look for new solutions. And I think in view of all this kind of like dramatic changes in the automotive industry, we also have to look for joint platforms with partners. So I mean, things like we are currently discussing how we're going to kind of like join our cooperation with BMW regarding our Drive Now activities. So that's something which you haven't seen 20 years ago. I think that's something completely new. We're also looking into how to integrate different mobility solutions on mobility platforms. That's why we created Moovel a couple of years ago. So things like what we do need to see is, and I think what's our task here at LAB 1886, given that we do bring these innovations into our company in order to address the need of our customers, we do merge and we do work together with partners internally as well as increasingly externally. And all our activities within Lab 1886 is with partnerships with strong partners such as Volocopter.
Okay. And just, when this is mentioned, I know it's kind of difficult to talk about that when the shareholder's right next to you, but I know you're a strong personality, so maybe you can manage. So what is your experience, Having a small startup, you just showed how it, started, kind of also went viral, so it was very small in the beginning, and now you've joined with, the big coloss, Daimler. How does that feel and smell and taste?
With Daimler, it was surprisingly fantastic. We defined very soon in the process 6 fields of cooperation. The problem was only that Volocopter did not have enough personnel to fill the projects. So Daimler even sent the people to our side to fill the project. So I think we have a very nice position at Daimler. Whatever we ask for, we get it within days. And probably most of the Daimler subsidiaries would love to be in that position. And Dieter Zetsch is a big fan of Volocopter and a big supporter. And Gabriele and Susanne, they're a perfect match to Volocopter. And we ask for something, we get it.
Perfect. So, Alex, you have a long history with Google. Mm-hmm. So you've, subjected yourself to like 2 dimensions of cultural change. So, say, more software startup. Well, Google is not that much of a startup, but I guess the culture still has a part of that. To an automotive producer, so industry change and cultural change in that, but also from a US more to a Japanese perspective. So what are your experiences there? Is your situation kind of comparable to what Stefan just pointed out?
Yeah, and also adding the factor that I'm European, so I'm half Scottish, half Spaniard. So it's evolving. I'm very happy with all the points that you guys are mentioning, because I also work on the venture capital side on Toyota, and what I discover is, number one, you cannot give the bear hug, as I call it, to the startup. You need to let them do things as they want to do. You need to be very respectful of the executive team. You need to be supportive. You need to be founders ready, and you need to be founders supportive. And it also takes a lot of humility as well to understand that you're not working with suppliers anymore. As my colleague said, I mean, you work with partners. In the past, OEMs were working with suppliers that you would dictate timelines, you would dictate how to do things, but now you need to be humble enough to say, I need to transform into a software company. I need to decide how I'm going to position myself in the market. If I'm going to be a mobility operator, or I'm going to be providing the technology, what do you want to do with that? In my case, it was complicated as well, because I was a Google, then I was a Moovit, not to be confused with moovel. So I also went to the starter world, but now it's trying to create that type of culture. That's what I'm also trying to do also in Toyota as well. But I think the key thing is to listen and to be respectful, and also to acknowledge that you don't have certain skill set that the big corporation is never going to have. Like in the case of AD, autonomous driving, you're talking about more than 50 different disciplines. And as far as I don't know any OEM who's been good at building software at scale.
I see that. And what's your experience, Gabriele? I mean, you see, you look at the automotive industry as a whole, so I guess you have insights in various companies. So looking at this aspect, so the ability of players in the automotive industry to adapt to the logic of software-driven platforms, also the logic of software-driven product development. How do you perceive the status of the industry, or I guess there are different states? Could you elaborate a bit on that?
It's a very interesting question, of course, and also a very vital question for Germany as a whole, especially also for the region. And I was looking at this for many years, and there were some waves, ups and downs. And in the beginning, I think there was this narrative that that automotive companies are doomed to go down, to fail, and that no one is interested in in mobility anymore. That people rather buy smartphones than cars, and that they're just simply not fancy and they cannot adapt to this change. And then I think the opposite happened. Then every tech company wanted to build cars suddenly. Apple contemplated building cars, and there was virtually no one who didn't contemplate to move in that phase, in that space. And then the automotive companies, I think they really got in the first wave. They got some kind of a shock, but it wasn't healthy shock. They all went to Silicon Valley and they all did their studies there, field studies and so on. They came back and they understood what platforms are about and how that business model works. And they did also, especially Daimler, did very early, quite interesting investments. And then they learned. And then I think there's another aspect that helped in that development, that the first wave of internet, I think it was called zero marginal cost internet, where you could music and film, streaming, all that kind, everything that this was virtual was replaced. And then everyone thought, yeah, that the same might happen to the automotive industry, that everyone will order its cab with smartphone and so on. But now I think we're on the beginning of a second wave, which is probably then called Internet of Things or however, but the haptical is important in that. And this is why also the tech players, Apple was the first and also standing out a little bit, but also the others invested into hardware companies, took over, Google bought hardware companies and so on. They all tried to get into this kind of more haptical field. And in this Internet of Things area, there are different rules. It's not about platforms, not all about platforms. Of course, you can enhance your product with a platform like Apple is doing that, and with ecosystem and so on. But it's not all about scaling. It's not all about zero marginal cost. It's a different game. And currently, the automotive industry suddenly is very good position. The challengers, they scaled down their ambitions or completely stepped out of it. Apple didn't build a car. Google is also struggling a bit, but Waymo is doing quite well. But the others are struggling. Uber is struggling. They're all struggling. And currently, I think the automotive companies are some kind of in a hero position. They learned their lessons. They got back in the game. They initiated all the changes that were necessary. And now I see only one risk. And this risk would be that they feel themselves too calm and say, no, we managed the change. We're through it. Good, well done. But because the real change is coming right now. And this is all about artificial intelligence. And this is where the automotive companies, some in the US did well. They did very large investments, but the Germans didn't so far. So this is where I'm a little bit anxious. And will they master that change as well? If they do, I think they're in a very strong position in this Internet of Things age. If they don't, they might then be exactly like they feared in the first wave. They might be pushed back to some kind of supplier position and not fill this OEM space anymore.
Okay, there's this one aspect that we just tapped into, technology, logic, adoption logic in terms of what role automotive and in particular car producers may play in the future. There may be another aspect if we think about governance of mobility, in particular inner city mobility governance. I mean, today, city governments, lay out roads, and everybody can decide, to use whatever vehicle to drive on that. Some cities in the world show very well that approach kind of does not really, manage the challenges we have. If you've ever been to Beijing or Mexico City and so on, it's very obvious. Munich is getting somewhere close to that now. So, Marek, what are your thoughts on that? So, if we consider that that city governments may take over a deeper role, if you think about layers of value in inner city mobility, that the governance is more stricter, limiting what type of vehicles are allowed to enter inner cities, that this inner city mobility is kind of de-individualized. What is the role of platforms, car manufacturers, autonomous vehicle, AI logic in that? How do you look at that?
I think we will observe a transition. So there's not a black and white and somebody's pulling over a switch. What we expect to see, and you called out a few cities, actually there is an ongoing discussion in Singapore about limiting the number of plates that have been deployed already to the current state and not allowing more individual vehicles to be registered, as there are other approaches in Paris where certain end digits are allowed for certain days crossing specific city areas. That's the beginning of a transformation of the individual mobility. I'd carefully say the real trick is going to be how that properly integrates in a socially acceptable, society positive way into a mobility concept of the future. And that involves a lot of infrastructure that is very interesting to us as the nature of our business. I don't think the rules have already been written, to be very honest and upfront. We do see startups actually pushing with very smart ideas into these markets. We do see the incumbent developing strategies that are built on their natural strengths by having huge populations out there in terms of technology. And we do see cities starting to identify these challenges as new opportunities of income, which needs to be at an acceptable level. London has delivered an example with the fees for actually entering London downtown. There was a lot of argument that this would never happen and never would sustain. Actually, it's out there since quite a few years. So I think as a society, we have to be prepared for these kind of changes. In terms of technology, it opens a complete new opportunity to deliver better service, better experience, and make people spending time on more useful things than actually lining up in traffic jams and standing in lines for subway access or other things. We just waste our time these days.
I certainly agree to that. I mean, I've been in San Diego for 9 months, and when I came back and was in Munich again, I thought I was back in Los Angeles. Alex, if I may ask you, I mean, you've showcased a software architecture for the future of autonomous driving at the occasion of the CES beginning of this year. If I can remember correctly, you were part of that, or Amazon. I guess I'm almost right and almost wrong, but can you point out a bit what type of or what kind of considerations are behind in terms of that, envisioning of the future of governance of inner city mobility that is kind of coded into that platform idea and architecture?
In the case of Toyota, I mean, number one, we're trying to work with different players, mostly from startups. That's where the innovation is coming from. Number two, the idea that you mentioned is more of like a multi-platform called ePalette. It would have different type of use cases depending on the needs of the customer. It could be like place like there's ideas for hotels, for restaurant, or everything in the mobility side. The key question over here, and also when it comes to AD, is also to understand what the user is going to need at the end. Is it a question of, as we were saying, is it a question to saving times when you're in a traffic jam? Is it a question of congestion? Also, one of the things that Moovel is doing very nicely in Germany, how do you work with local authorities in order to understand what their pain points are? So in Toyota, we're trying to do it in different angles, but also on the software architecture and also on the AD side, just to understand, number one, as you were saying, Gabriele, what are the different technologies that we need to build so that we have the best architecture so that there's no problems in terms of safety. Because most of the times what happens is that people say, as we were saying all together, oh, we want to have autonomous driving in X amount of time. I also agree with you about the commitment. I mean, also the Toyota materials that you have for outside consumption, we don't commit with timelines because it's an unknown. The technology is an unknown. We know that there's still a long way to go. We have prototypes, we're launching. We know that there are different cases, platforms, but you need to be humble enough to say, I need to learn from academia, and I need to say, I need to build in this way or the other direction for the best reliable and safe solution.
Okay. I would like to end around, thanks very much, with one question to you, Gabriele. I mean, you said we are going to have autonomous driving at the same year where we have the first man on Mars. So when do we have third dimension taxis in the air? Which type of planet do we need to conquer at that year too?
Yeah, that is an interesting one because if you look to all these older science fiction movies, all the cars were flying. So it was, if you had a question, how would the future look like? Everyone would say flying. Today it's totally different. No one is flying. Elon Musk is thinking about going under the ground. That will be very interesting, but I think your business case is sound, and it's very interesting also the movie that we've seen. I think there will be a third dimension, probably not in mass transportation. Yeah, there we will see.
Exactly.
But I think also in specific cities, like the ones you had in the movie, I think this will be a very interesting scenario, and I would buy a room in the top of this building and have my Volocopter there. And so probably it will be Dubai. I don't know. Planet will be Earth and city will be Dubai.
Thanks very much. Brilliant. Please give a hand of applause to our... And thanks very much, Gabriele, for joining us here. We have a little bit of a present for you. Alex, thanks very much for joining. I know you are small on your baggage, but if it is exceeding weight limits, you can eat it. That's the advantage. Thanks very much for joining. Stefan, thanks very much for being here. And Marek, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for your insights. Please give a hand of applause to our mobility panel. Thanks very much.